Hello, good afternoon. How are we all doing? I hope you're doing well. I'm really enjoying my Wednesday so far. It's been a little bit of a chilled Wednesday, hence the very chilled attire today. But I am wanting to still show up and talk to you all about the energy market in Australia. And I'm just going to just make sure we're all good on LinkedIn, also so that I can see your comments when you say hello. So when you do show up, as you pop in, say hello, tell us where you're from, and ask any questions along the way as well. We'll see how long we go for. I want to talk about the Australian market today, the energy market in particular. And the reason I thought this would be a good topic is I did a talk yesterday, and it was really to talk to clean tech companies in India and help them understand what does the market in Australia look like. We covered a range of topics, but I'm only going to share with you one particular component that I shared with them, which was around how the energy market is working in Australia. And that's really important to understand if you're looking to enter the market, especially in the clean tech space or mining space, and understanding how it works, how all of the moving pieces come together, and really why things are shifting in this way. So I guess in terms of a little bit of background, we've had a lot of climate politic wars in Australia for a long time, and there was even sort of pre-scary period where we thought our renewable energy target was going to be abolished. And thankfully, since then, that was about 7 years ago. Since then, we've seen that not happen to start with. And the government that now has come into position and into power is really active and taking a lot of steps around putting in a strong climate policy in place and resulting legislation to really drive this whole decarbonisation future for Australia. And, we're actually making strong commitments as well now under the Paris Agreement. Our recent sort of NDC, which is the nationally determined contributions, which is really our commitment under the Paris Agreement, was certainly, a stronger response in the recent sort of amendment to our previous NDC. So Australia is on its way to really positioning as a strong renewable leader, and it has the resources for it. If you've ever been to Australia, then there's a lot of land, a lot of space for things like large-scale solar and wind farms, but also we have a lot of wind, and we have a lot of water for creating this energy flow and creating this supply system that can really work in a very smart and very clever way, but also positions us as a good potential offshore or supply for other countries. Lost my words, but really a supplier for other countries and their need for cleaner technology and renewables, especially countries such as the surrounding islands nearby to Australia in the Pacific coast, so Pacific Ocean. And so that's really the view on Australia overall in terms of what we're capable of doing. So yeah, I can see some of you on. Say hello. Don't be shy. I want to just kind of share my screen so you can take a look. Let me know as well that you can see, because that is, of course, important. Give me a second. Here we go. Cool. So my end, I think you can see it. So hopefully you can on your end. Let me know though if you can't. But really, as I said, we covered a range of topics when I did this talk, but I wanted to in particular just dive into the Australian energy market. If you need me to make this screen bigger, the share screen, let me know as well. I have an option for doing that. But this is a new one I'm trying out where I'm not as small compared to the screen. So really, there is a lot happening. As with any kind of governmental system, ours as well, as with any, is complex. There's a lot of moving pieces, and there's a lot of change happening now because of, as I said, all of the conversations happening at federal level, which is national level government. But we have three levels of government. We've got federal, we've got state, and we've got local. And so there's a lot of conversations happening at all three levels. And in the past, where the federal government has sort of lacked that drive around creating sustainable policy and frameworks, they're now starting to have a lot of active discussion about it. And in the past, we've had the state and the local governments really drive this conversation. So now we're starting to see really a connection across all of our levels of government, and hopefully more unification as well, rather than this being us versus them and them versus us sort of thing. So that's what we're starting to see, which is really wonderful. So these governments, I don't know what it is about them, but they love acronyms. Okay, so there's a bunch of acronyms here, and I'm going to talk through them, so don't worry. It's not as scary as it looks. But really, in the past, we had the Council of Australian Governments, the COAG, COAG, and they have now been sort of moved out, and in place of them, we have the ENCRC and the EMM. And the EMM is really an acronym for Energy Ministers Meetings. So they're actual meetings where they come together and discuss those material topics that are needed to drive policy discussion, legislation discussion, and so on. And the ENCRC is the Energy National Cabinet Reform Committee. And so together, they work together to really drive these three key bodies who look after the energy market. So the three key bodies that look after the energy market, and when I say the energy market, I'm talking about our electricity network and our gas network, which is the NEM, National Electricity Network. And you can see that over here as I move my mouse around, and below that, the gas network. So these three bodies, the AEMC, the AER, and the AEMO, are the ones that really operate and run this energy market. So they all have different roles, of course, and they work together to play out these roles. But the AEMC is the Australian Energy Market Commission. So they're an independent statutory body, and they essentially are the rule developers. So they come together and develop the rules for how the market is going to operate. And their core purpose, the AEMC, is to make sure that there's productivity in the operation of the market, and there's a high level of living standards for Australians, and ultimately that the market is moving towards a decarbonised, affordable, reliable, stable energy system, right, for all the consumers. So they're really looking out for the consumers and their usage of the market, as well as that market transition piece. The AER is essentially a regulator, so the Australian energy regulator, and they're the ones that enforce the rules. So they're going to make sure that you're doing the right thing and that you're following the rules, and that you're getting rewarded when you need to be, or reprimanded when you need to be, according to the rules. So they're really that regulatory process around the network and the operators and the retailers and so on. And the AEMO is the Australian Energy Market Operator. So they really look at day-to-day operations of the electricity and gas systems. And they do this, of course, for the systems across Australia. And their goal is really to make sure that Australians have that affordable, secure, reliable energy. So you can see there's certainly overlap between the three bodies here that operate this market. But they ultimately come together to do this. And essentially, when we look at the energy market that they are looking after, which is the NEM and the gas networks, we have to know how it works in Australia, because Australia is very big. So the southeast of Australia is covered by the NEM and one electricity system, essentially, and one gas system. Whereas the other two big and very far away states in Australia, which is Northern Territory and Western Australia, because they're quite far away and they're also quite big, they have their own network in terms of electricity and gas, so physical network. But the laws and the regulations, they also have separate laws and regulations, but all of those for NT on its own, for WA, Western Australia, Northern Territory, and the rest of Australia, all three sets of legislation comes under the operation of the AEMC, the AEMO, and the AER. So they look after all of that. So there is some unification in the kind of the policy, legislation, and regulatory regulation around the energy market. But given the size of Australia, the physical networks are separated, and their legislation is separated. But the ultimate kind of operation of all of it together falls under one place, which is good because it means that and we get to kind of manage the system and make sure that there is integrity in the operations and there's sort of unity as well, or unification across how the market is operated. So that's really all of it in a nutshell, the core of it. And so if we think about, what most networks are looking to do, at least in terms of energy, is they want to ensure energy security, stability in the grid, that the pricing is affordable, and that there is long-term sustainability. So essentially, moving towards a clean, renewable, decarbonized operation. And so how do we make sure that there's integrity in this system is the ACCC, which is the Australian Consumer Commission, Competition and Consumer Commission. They're the ones that monitor the prices, profit margins, how the wholesale energy market is really working. And we have the ESB, which is the Energy Stability, I'm mixing up all my acronyms, the Energy Security Board. And so they are sort of a separate body to the ENCRC and the EMM to make sure that they are taking that information that is coming through the network and that they're listening as well to the Australian chief scientist, who was otherwise kind of ignored in the past. So there is that kind of integrity in the system now where that advice is being taken on board as the market transitions into a clean market. So in the Australian energy market, there is a lot of moving parts and it's very dynamic. Right now, we are quite a centralized system, largely with fossil fuel generation across the country. And so we're really seeing a rapid move into more clean technology. And at the moment, or I think when it was last established, like the last report on this was the end of 2021, that Australia is now 32.5% supported by clean energy in terms of electricity. So huge amount of renewable uptake. And you can see kind of why this is happening is because the prices have really increased and there's a lot of kind of dynamicity in the pricing model. And so as a result, it's driving a lot more renewables to come into play because renewables are becoming a lot cheaper. And when you really compare the levelized cost of renewables to fossil fuel derived energy, it's a lot cheaper. Of course, when you put storage into play, that's where renewables sort of throws those figures out the window. So this is where there's a real need for supporting this energy transition piece with looking at battery storage and grid connection and transmission, as well as looking at a more centralized smart data system. So not necessarily that the physical network is centralized, but more so that the data capture and data analysis part of our network is well captured, monitored, and centralized for that analysis and output. So that's where the market is moving. It's really exciting to see. And what's also exciting to see is, we're now starting to have a more robust renewable energy market structure. So this is what this is that I'm sharing with you now. And so the body that sits kind of right at the top of this, again, the Minister for Climate Change sort of administers all of this, but the Clean Energy Regulator sits at the top of this structure. You can see to the very left here. So I have to look to the right where I'm sharing my screen so I can see where my mouse is hovering, but that's the Clean Energy Regulator. And so really how this works in terms of how we're looking at clean energy, we've had for a long time, particularly when Australia had a carbon market that was quite active around the time that the mining boom was really happening and taking off, that we had NGERS, which is the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme. And so NGERS is there to sort of provide a methodology around how we can look at emissions, energy production, energy consumption, and so on. So it's really a method of calculating emissions. And the ERF, so NGERS and ERF really work together, and the ERF is the Emissions Reduction Fund. The ERF was really a fund that was going to support more projects that were looking at emissions reduction, at sequestering carbon, and really providing a support system for them. So NGERS and the ERF, they work together. So I'm just talking about the top part of this diagram at the moment. And they work together to get more Australian carbon credit units, ACCUs, ACCCU. Nice to have you here, Awanash. Thanks so much for joining. So NGERS, ERF, they're really working together to have more ACCUs being generated, which is really a carbon credit, right? They roughly range from $15 to $25 per ton of carbon emitted, mitigated. So when you're generating an ACCU, traditionally we've been tabulating them or kind of tracking them in the ANREU, which is Australian National Registry for all of these emissions. But now there's a carbon exchange that is also coming into play and working with the ANREU, which I'm not sure how this will play out. I think that the plan might be to have kind of just an Australian carbon exchange system, which is much more diverse and not just looking at ACCUs, but also potentially looking at other carbon units and certificates, around the world. So really trying to globalize Australia's carbon network. And so that's where the system is kind of developing now, this sort of top part of the diagram. And there is also sort of that older part of the system, which is we had the RET target, so the renewable energy target, which, if you recall, I kind of mentioned at the start, Australia was looking at abolishing their targets around renewable energy, and that was the target in play at the time that they were looking to abolish. Thankfully, it was not abolished. It stayed in place, and we also have now met our RET target. So, which is why this target is kind of like an all piece of the system now. It's probably not going to stick around for much longer, or might change. So in the past, we had the RET target, which was really a target for how much we wanted to reduce our emissions by. It was a relatively low target, to be honest. And the idea of the RET target was to generate renewable energy certificates, RECs, REC. So that's been happening for a long time. If you look at bills in Australia, electricity bills in Australia, you'll see RECs on there. So you'll see them as large-scale generation certificates and small-scale generation certificates. So they're really certificates for clean technology, clean energy generation. And so, yeah, that's been happening for a while, and it looks like this system is just kind of really going through a very transformative period where they're looking at making sure it's robust and it's ready for kind of a global stage where we can interact with the global economies around carbon, because we are really in a carbon economy. We're just sort of building it now, and this is the way the future is heading. So this is where Australia is currently now in this process, and to ensure that, of course, we are making sure that we're doing the right thing and we're doing it well. There is a safeguard mechanism in place, and that really sits over the top of this energy market, and that's really to ensure that the ERF, so the Emissions Reduction Fund, these projects, they're not offsetting emissions that were and then being significantly negated by emissions increase, things like that. So really trying to ensure that there's integrity in the way that these businesses are operating and saying what they're doing and doing what they say, and so on. So that's a system that they've put in place, and I'm sure it's going to get better and better at doing the right thing. Oh, where am I? I've gone to the wrong place. Sorry, guys. Here we go. We'll go back. I'm forgetting which way to scroll. Here we are. So in the end, we can see the market is, including some really old parts of it and including some really new parts of it. And there's certainly a big sort of transition in our renewable energy system and the way that we're looking at the market. And of course, there are a lot of peak bodies, peak authorities in this space who are a little bit outside of the Australian government, which really helps in leaning on their reports, leaning on their advice. ARENA, being one that actually is connected to government, is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, but we also have the Clean Energy Council, the Climate Council, ACF, Australian Conservation Foundation. So there are a lot of big players who are continuously putting pressure on this system and making sure that there is integrity, that there is continuous improvement of our renewable energy market. So it's, just a really exciting time, really great time for renewable and clean tech companies to look at Australia to support this transition and of course, benefit from this transition as well, create jobs and make great, clean money, because why not? If you're making money doing something good, then why not make that money? So if you're interested in talking about this more, I'm going to drop a link to my calendar and you can certainly book in a time and we can have a chat about this. If you're wanting to learn more, let me know. If you're a company that is looking to actually kind of step into the Australian market and wants to know a little bit more about this, then I'd be more than happy to talk to you about this. So I host these sessions every week on Wednesday, usually at 12:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesdays. And so let me know if there's a particular topic you'd like me to discuss. Thank you for those who have stuck with me throughout this session. I really appreciate your time. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you all soon. So take care, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing and say bye.